Hey, welcome back to another episode of The Opportunity. I'm your host, Greg Elfring, the head of marketing over at Empire Flippers. And today I have a very special guest. I am talking with Jonathan J. I discovered John via YouTube, actually, because I'm always curious, what are people saying in the no money down kind of space? In general, I find the no money down space to be ultra risky and filled with a lot of plot holes, should we say. But John has a lot of good perspective on this. Plus, he's actually done the deed multiple times when it comes to acquiring businesses using all sorts of creative financing strategy, including acquiring, I believe the number in the podcast I said 48, but I believe the actual number is he acquired 54 nurseries all across the UK, all in the span of about roughly 38 months during the pandemic, which we talk a bit about in the podcast about how that is wasn't the greatest idea, but it still turned out all right. And it goes to show you the power when it comes to buying businesses. And I think it's a really cool story, even though it didn't turn into what he had hoped it would turn into. I think it is an extremely powerful story nonetheless, and all the lessons you learn, plus all the things he had to do during that 38-month period to really get that rocket ship going. So John is a great guy. He has an awesome YouTube channel. We'll link it down in the show notes down below. And just all around, really good dude to talk to. Unfortunately, we didn't have that much time because we both had to run to different appointments. But if you like the episode, let us know. Maybe we'll bring him back for a part two. All right, with that said, enough of me talking. Let's dive into the episode. See you on the other side. Bye. All right, I got Jonathan J here with me. I am pretty excited to have this conversation because, like I was saying to you offline, I actually been consuming quite a bit of your videos over the last few months. But for my audience out there in Empire Flippers land who may not be aware of you, just a brief background on who you are, what you do, and where you're at in the world.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for inviting me on, Greg. It's great to meet you. So I first sold a business in 1999, so 24 years ago, and it was a real lesson in how to sell a business and how to buy a business because I saw it from the other side as well, and I didn't actually realize how important that lesson was going to be for me until a few years later when I bought a competitor to my company. And this competitor was a multi-million annual revenue business. And I did the classic no money down style deal that people talk about so much. I took that business that I bought, combined it with the one I already had, and I sold it to a private equity firm the following year. And that was what I've always described as a life changing deal. Because obviously, private equity deal in quite sort of large numbers. And that was really quite interesting timing because it was just before the last financial crisis. So the timing was
Good timing.
luck more than judgment was actually very good. Uh, And then over the years, I've bought businesses from private equity firms. I've turned around distressed businesses. I bought 48 businesses during the pandemic. People always ask, what's the advice you can give about buying 48 businesses during a pandemic? And my advice is don't buy 48 businesses during a pandemic. Massively stressful. In fact, I ended up in hospital. It was not great at all. So I've got some lessons learned around that. But I've been doing this for a while. And about 7 years ago, after selling another business we haven't mentioned yet, I got approached to teach it to other people. And I did a classroom type event. And I thought that I was just doing it as a one off. I thought, these people would come, I would tell them what I know, and off they'd go. But then more people contacted me and said, can you do another one? And before I knew it, I had a little side hustle of a business where I'm sort of training other people how to buy businesses. And that's now sort of quite substantial. We've got clients all around the world. I'm from London, but our clients aren't just in the UK, they're absolutely everywhere. And that kind of happened almost by accident, really. And that's, I guess, what led me to you and you to me.
Yeah, it's amazing you bought 48 businesses through the pandemic. I know it was quite stressful, as you said, but out of curiosity, with those, the battle wounds you've gotten from doing that, what kind of structures and systems would you put in place if you were going to do it again to have the bandwidth where you don't end up in the hospital from stress as you're
Yeah.
acquiring all these businesses?
Yeah, what I found particularly stressful was the fact that I was dragged into operational things, and I'm not a very good business operator. I'm the ideas guy who can go out and make a deal happen, but put me in an office and tell me to run a business, it's just not my skill set. I don't have that that background or that talent or that ability. So I got dragged into lots of the operational. So what I would do differently is I would do exactly what private equity does, which is you hire your management team first. So you get your management team first, then you make your first acquisition, your second, your third. We were always doing it catch up. We were always doing it after we needed those people. So I was getting finance directors, CFOs on board. One guy actually had a breakdown because it was such a big job for him to take on because he hadn't been with us from early days. He came in too late in the process, and it was just it was a nightmare. I had 375 staff, and I'm the last person you want to be managing staff. I mean, that's just so again, I would have had a great person looking after all of the staff. And when you've got a growing group of businesses, you need a lot of cash, and people often underestimate how much cash they need. They're sort of cash hungry businesses, anything that's growing and rapidly growing and you're acquiring. And we were doing 2-3 deals a week sometimes. So I would have, going back to the beginning, I would have started raising funds a lot earlier, because raising money for growth, in this case, millions of dollars, takes time. It is very, very time consuming. And to do that and operate a business is a big ask. So
Yeah.
those are the things I would have done earlier.
That makes a ton of sense. You were basically doing the actual building the airplane as you're skydiving.
Yeah,
So the
I
proverbial
hadn't
startup
like
metaphor.
that, but that's exactly what I was doing. Yes.
I hope this works. This better fly, otherwise we're going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the nature of business. I want to get into how you structure these deals, but first, so the nursery schools were the sector that you did 48 acquisitions in, but
That's
in
right.
general,
I did 53 altogether, 48 during
53
the
altogether.
pandemic. Yeah.
In general, what kind of characteristics do you look for in an acquisition? Is there a certain size, operations in place ideally? Like, what's your kind of buy box when you're looking at businesses? And is it mostly offline
Yeah.
assets? Do you buy online?
Yeah, it really depends. The size of the business depends upon the sector. And in that early years education sector, they're smaller deals because that's just the way they are. There's some mom and pop businesses, and then you've got larger operators higher up the food chain that are far more professional. I mean, the ideal business to buy is always one that has management in place already. I mean, that's really what you want. So when the owner leaves, then you've got a management team that's running the operations. And when that doesn't happen, that's when you're dragged into it because there's no one else who can do the job. So you need that management team in place. And that means, and I encourage everyone that I work with for their first acquisition, make it a multi-million revenue acquisition. Because if you go for something that's, $300,000, it's not going to get you very far. If that's making 20% margin, that's $60,000. That's a salary. Okay. Where if you've got a business doing $3 million and is making $600,000 profit, that starts to move the needle. That starts to pay off the mortgage, put the kids through school, all of those things. So I always say to people, go for the bigger businesses because you'll make more money. They're easier to finance. They're easier to buy. They run themselves better. They don't need you. I mean, what's not to like about any of those things?
It's funny. I often talk to entrepreneurs that come to our marketplace to sell their business. They ask me, like, what's the biggest thing you can do in terms of increasing my valuation? I always joke with them, but there's a lot of truth to this. I tell them you should become the most useless person on your team, because if you are, as the owner, the most useless player, that's a very sellable business. But
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and
yeah,
and when you talk to owners who operate, you know that you're going to have a problem at some point, and that the problem being that a small business, very very fragile, it can collapse in on itself as soon as you take the owner out. So you're right, making yourself redundant in your own business is the fastest way to increasing value, and it just makes your business easier for someone to buy from you.
100%. Yeah. And when you said there, like the smaller businesses are much more fragile, I often coach buyers on our marketplace, at least. You should look for ability to add in the room for failure, because business is like a lot of failure and a little bit of successes like wash away all the failure, right? If
Yeah,
you're actually
yeah.
successful in business, you're always going to fail. So having in that margin for error, I think, is extremely important. And speaking of that, so one of the ways I found you, because I'm always curious on the no money down deal guys, and a lot of the stuff I see out there is just like that just simply doesn't work, the YouTube gurus or whatever. But your stuff I liked. I like how you approach this. So talk to me about how you have done this no money down financing, or how you teach your students, where in such a way you don't accrue often that risk where it makes the business more fragile. Like, how does your strategy
Yeah.
differ from that, from the others?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it doesn't work for every business. I mean, you can't walk up to any business owner and do this type of deal. Usually, you do this type of deal when your options are limited because you don't have lots of money. And
Hmm.
I always thought that buying businesses was usually the sort of the realm of private equity, where there's sort of hundreds of millions of dollars to spend. It's not the realm of the individual, people like you and me, individual people who want to go out and buy a business, unless we have access to millions of dollars. So there has to be an alternative way of buying a business that doesn't require millions of dollars. And thank goodness that there is. And yeah, it's the classic leveraged buyout that, again, is used by private equity buyers, where we take the assets of the business and we borrow against those assets in order to fund the acquisition of the business. Now, again, you can't do this with every business. And we actually have some methodologies that people can use around businesses that don't have assets, and they're all intangible, and it's all about goodwill, but there's no physical assets. But if we place that aside for a moment, the businesses that have the real estate and the equipment and the machinery and the vehicles and all of those things, we can use different types of financing where our personal credit score is not relevant. So it doesn't matter what happens in our personal lives. This is corporate borrowing. And we can fund the acquisition of the business, usually by taking a bit here and a bit there and a bit there, putting it all together, and we get our funding to acquire the business with a little bit of seller finance in there as well. That always gets the deal over the line. Maybe a bit of an earn out where we pay the seller according to the success of the business. So we take all these bits, we put it all together, and that's how we make the acquisition. And I've got people buying $10 million businesses, revenue businesses, for their first deal. I've actually got a guy who paid $10 million for his first deal, and that was a heavy equipment business. And he didn't have $10 million, so he paid $9 million on day one. So we had to be creative out of the financing of the business, and $1 million seller finance over a 12-month period, which is just about paid that off now.
I love it. I love LBOs in general. They don't work as well in my space just because of the liquidity is so much
Of
faster with a
course.
lot of digital business. It can work for sure, but also the asset light portion. How do you structure these LBOs where you're not adding in, massive risk to the business? Like, is there certain things you're doing to mitigate that? Because the way I view it, when you're doing any kind of financing, especially no money down, where you're like leveraging kind of to the hilt, you are getting rid of some of that ability to have that margin for failure. So, what are you
Yes.
doing there to give yourself
Yeah.
that buffer and that breathing room?
So this only works with businesses that have really positive cash flows. And that is the key, the secret, if you like, to this. Because if you're buying businesses with really positive cash flows, it has the cash flow to support the debt. Now, I always say to people, buy businesses that are established and profitable. And there is a school of thought that you should buy a distressed business that's on its knees, buy it for $1, turn it around, make a success of it, and be a hero. Now, I've done that, and I've been a hero, and I've done that, and I've failed. So I've seen it from both sides, and I've got a bit of experience under my belt, and I still don't get it right all the time. So I don't think that's a great strategy for a beginner. A beginner should be looking for a business that has made money day in, day out for the past 5 years, that has predictable cash flows, that can support any debt that you put into the business and still have enough profit for you to take money out. Because let's remember why we're doing this. We're doing this to make some money. So we need to have
Right.
enough money
Yeah.
left over to take out, and then you've got yourself a business that will, for the next 5 years, make that money. Where a distressed business, a business that is on its knees and needs help, isn't making any money, which is why it's on its knees and needing help. And the chances of turning that around, I think, are so slim, I wouldn't even bother now. I'm 51 years old, and I don't think I really want the stress of a turnaround at my time of life. I would have done it. Well, I did it, 10 years ago, but I wouldn't do it now.
Yeah, that's the thing with we get it too on our side. A lot of business buyers are brand new. They think, oh, it's like buying a stock, buy low, sell high. And like you're not wrong, but the mechanics that goes into fixing a distressed asset is extremely hard. Like you need to be skilled at the
Yeah.
thing that it's going bad at, plus all the other stuff. So we often tell
Yes.
people like it's way better just to buy a premium business and grow it because it's not like real estate, like a single family home or whatever, where you like it's next to impossible to double your rent on a single family home unless you're doing some really shady, weird stuff. But with a business, it's not that unreasonable to do that, especially a digital business, but same concepts with offline. So I agree. I think buying distressed assets is a kind of a newbie trap when it comes to buying, like a very expensive
Yeah.
newbie trap that people should
Yeah,
probably
I agree.
avoid.
I agree with you because it looks so enticing. Buy a business for $1. But really, I mean, the catch is you're inheriting all the problems that the business
Right.
has. And sometimes people even say, buy a business for $1, don't do any due diligence. Do the due diligence after you've bought the business. It's like, well, that's like, I mean,
Now you realize
every
all the problems you have. You can't solve
yeah,
it.
exactly. Every time I've had a deal not be great, it's when I haven't done enough diligence. Every time, every single time. So I've seen it on both sides. I've sold, I've bought, I've seen it from all different angles, and I enjoy helping other people do the same. Both my parents were dance teachers. They taught dancing in a dance school, and they owned the business and they were teachers. So I've inherited a little bit of the business ownership and also the teaching. I can assure you I have not inherited the dancing. The dancing it skipped a generation to my daughter. I've got two left feet, but I've acquired, if you like, the business side of things and also the teaching because you know M&A, mergers and acquisitions, is a complicated subject, and I think it's really important to be able to break it down so that people can understand it step by step. And I've never had anyone say that they are confused by what I teach them. Yeah, I don't use jargon. I don't try and impress them with and show off with what I know. I just want people to understand exactly how to make it work for them.
Yeah, that's what I like about your style. Like I've been in this business for almost 7 years, and I've seen a
Okay.
lot of flash in the pan, people come and go, but every now and then I come across a gem. So that's why I wanted to get you onto the podcast.
Well, I appreciate
Now,
that.
moving away from the no money down stuff for a second, the nursery schools you bought, the 50, you said 54, right? Over the last two
Yeah,
years, roughly 2 years.
53. Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned if you had to do it over again, you would have gotten fundraising for that. So I'm assuming that as you were acquiring them, you were constantly seeking new funding vehicles. Like, tell me a bit about how that worked for you because you were going at breakneck speed. Like, how do you even like? All right, Mr. Banker or Mr. Private Equity, I am doing 3 of these deals a week. Give me unlimited credit. Like, what's that? What does that talk look like?
We didn't do that. We didn't even have an overdraft on the bank. We did
Wow.
everything from cash flow. It's a business that doesn't require too much working capital on a site by site basis because the customers, the parents, pay in advance of the product, the service being delivered.
Like
So
lump
working
sum
capital,
upfront payment.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Although
Gotcha.
to be fair, yeah, in some of the areas, the locations that we were operating from, there were some cash flow challenges with late payments and having to chase payments, and not everywhere, but in just some of the areas. But that's just the way it was. So we didn't have any external funding at all. We did it
Wow.
all from cash flow. So we would leverage the cash flow of one to buy the next, leverage that cash flow to buy the next.
Interesting. So, walk me through like how that would work for the seller on their end. Like, because I'm assuming the seller to make it worthwhile for them, typically they would want to get at least several months of their cash flow up front. So, how were you structuring that with them?
Yeah, sometimes, not all the time. So, one of the quirks of that sector was that some of the income was, we say local authority funding, but like local government
Hmm.
funding. And the local government funding would be paid in advance on a certain date. So let's say it was going to be paid on the 31st of August for the next term of education. Well, we would complete the deal, close the deal on the 1st of September, and we would use part of that local authority funding that had arrived to fund the acquisition, to give the seller some day one money. So that would be one of our financing techniques. So again, we're just using the cash in the business to fund it.
Interesting. And so you're using that cash and then also the cash flow from the other nurseries that you had to kind of give them
Correct.
that big initial win. And it just kind of was a self feeding cycle from there. Once you got that first one, you were able to acquire a lot more, a lot quicker.
Yeah, exactly that. But one important point is that the majority of these acquisitions were done during the pandemic, and seller confidence was at an all-time low.
No
And
way.
we negotiated,
I can only
we
imagine.
negotiated yeah. So we negotiated really good deals, like really, really good deals. And that meant that we were paying a lot less than we would have been paying a year earlier. So you combine those two things, the way we financed it with the fact that we were paying low prices, that was how we were able to do so many.
Did that the low confidence start rubbing off on you as you're like inching above 50 businesses? Like, what am I doing? Do I have enough runway to get out of this COVID madness?
Yeah, no, you make a really good point. So about a year ago, so this was about January 22, we actually put together a deal. We're at LOI with a private equity fund. And the valuation was insane. We were selling 20% for 20 million. Yeah, that was a
Wow.
100 million pound valuation. And it was just an incredible number. And it didn't the deal didn't happen. And it didn't happen because there was the COVID and everything to do with the pandemic took longer than everyone expected. No one expected it to be going on for years. And then in the UK, we had something we called the ping-demic, where we had an app on our phone that if you've been in touch or close to someone who had COVID, you'd get you get pinged on your phone, and then you wouldn't have to go to work, or they wouldn't want you to go to work. So we had massive staff. We had an incredible staffing crisis, and Brexit, the whole Brexit thing where we came out of the European Union, that really didn't help our staffing at all, and we were struggling with staffing. And the challenge was, from the private equity perspective, is how do we grow this business if we can't get the people? Because without the people, there is no business. And also, it's a type of business in the UK where it's paid at a very low rate of pay, very, very low. And people were leaving the sector to go and work in different roles. Britain is famous for its fish and chips. So,
Of
so we,
course, yeah.
we, we would have people leave the business to go and work in a fish and chip shop, and they got paid more money in the fish and chip shop than we could pay them. So the private equity guys looked at the bigger economics of this, and the deal didn't happen. I'm still in touch with them. We're still talking about different things, but that deal didn't happen, which was a real shame.
Well, just the fact that you got to the LI stage with that valuation, like most deals fall apart. I think it's like 80% of deals that go into LI fail. I mean, you know how it is. It's a numbers game, right? But that's still a really good sign. Like during the pandemic, like that kind of valuation was possible. Do you still own them, or did you actually do a deal now where you
No.
made an
So
exit from the nursery schools?
So that was disappointing because it didn't bode well for the future, to be honest. Because my idea was always a very short-term investment for me. It was
Right.
always going to be a 3-year window. That was what I was looking
A
at.
classic roll up
And
strategy from the sounds of it.
yeah, exactly. And quite frankly, if I wasn't going to put it bluntly, if I wasn't going to win big on this, then I had other things that I wanted to do. And I had my 50th birthday, and I think I started to realize that my body wasn't quite as strong as I thought it was. I always thought of myself as a very robust individual, maybe not massively fit, but quite healthy. And then, I had these stomach pains that were sort of were apps. I thought it was appendicitis. I was Googling, what do these stomach pains mean?
The doom
I went,
googling. Yeah, I've been there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I went to the doctors. I never go to the doctors. And I went to the doctors, and she immediately sent me to hospital to have a colonoscopy, which is not my favorite medical procedure, shall we say. And they couldn't find anything. I thought they were going to find an ulcer or something. And they said, no, it's all stress. So I went to a psychotherapist and I said, look, I want to talk this through because somehow, this is starting to have a physical effect on me. And we concluded that the problem was the business. I was no longer enjoying it. The acquisitions were fun, but the actual operations were an absolute nightmare. I mean, I'm not cut out for managing 375 staff. I mean, that's for sure. So we started looking at options, and we started looking at an equity investor in order to grow the business further. And it became very, very clear that with an equity investor, my shareholding, which was the majority at that point, I'd become a minority shareholder in my own business. So effectively, I would end up working for someone else. And that's just not my personality. I didn't want to do that. So if I put all these things together, yeah, minority in my own business, massively stressful. I mean, my daughter brought her spelling test home from school, and one of the words was unhappy. And she pointed at me and she said, "That's you." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What makes me unhappy?" And she said, "Work." And I thought, oh, so I'm a bad role model. So I've suddenly become a bad role model for my daughter, who
You're
I would
creating
love.
your own
I'd love to
cage. Yeah.
someday. I put it all together, and so I did a deal with my business partner, and she took over the complete ownership of the business. She did the equity investment because she was happy to do that, and I let her get on with things. And I've completely changed a track. I've done my early years, and it's no longer something that interests me.
Well, there's always a way to get a deal done. I mean, I don't know what the specifics are on that, but I'm assuming it was a positive outcome for everyone involved, or did you end up actually taking a hit by doing it that style?
Well, the business hadn't cost me anything apart from time. And yeah, I didn't make millions of dollars, if that's what you're asking, but I got my time back because it was like 7 days a week. I got my health back. I'm now sort of in a better physical shape than I've
Oh,
ever been
good.
in my entire life. And it's freed up so much time to look at other things. So we say this when we're looking at buying businesses from people. It's not always about the money. It's about what do you want to achieve? Is it retirement? Is it getting rid of the stress? And that really became me. I mean, I've done well financially over the years from different things. So yeah, it wasn't a desperate need to sort of to make my money on that particular exit. So it wasn't the world's greatest exit financially, it certainly wasn't, but I won in what I consider now to be far more important things, picking my daughter up from school, doing things like that,
Yeah.
which make me happy.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's another thing. Entrepreneurs, especially business buyers and sellers, at times they get blinded by the money, but they don't realize the Faustian pack they're making to create that money, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm making 80 grand a
exactly.
month. Like, well, that's great. That's revenue. What's your profit? Like, well, three, and you're working like 80 hours a week. I like,
Yeah.
so a lot of people don't think through this stuff, but I mean, even though it wasn't
Yeah,
as big of a
I get
success as
that.
what you did,
I
like
get it.
40,
And
50
in my
businesses,
20s,
wild. What's that?
it was all about the money. In my 20s, it was just chasing the money. That's all I was interested in. I'm more interested now in lifestyle.
Yeah, 100%. I've always been attracted to lifestyle. My previous career was a oil field roughneck in the Arctic Circle in Alaska. And that's where you're
Okay.
working really long hours, like 80 hours a week, and it's cold as hell as you're tripping pipe, moving metal.
Yeah.
I was like, nah, never again. I never want to do that again. So I can relate on the lifestyle a bit for sure. Talk to me about, I know we're running out of time here. I want to be cognizant of it, but one thing I did want to touch on is the way you go and source these off market deals. Obviously, we're a marketplace, we're brokers. So, everyone listening, don't go do off market deals if you're doing digital businesses. But I'm curious on how you go about sourcing this. Like, I know you have some sort of letter system where you're sending out letters. Is that the main thing you're doing, or just walk me through
Yeah.
your system?
If I was looking for digital businesses, I would definitely go to you. I mean, that would be, yeah, you'd be my first port of call. That's exactly, what I would do. With sort of more traditional businesses, with retiring owners, we approach them offline. We do it in a very traditional way. And my background, when I say background, I mean like background 25 years ago was direct mail. And, we used to get customers for businesses by writing letters to them. So I've really taken what I learned 25 years ago and I've brought it up to date. So all of my masterminders, the people in my programs, they use this letter system to find those retiring owners. And someone said, well, why don't you just advertise on Facebook? And I said, because the people selling businesses who are 65 years old probably aren't on
They're,
Facebook,
yeah. Or
but the
not long enough
majority.
to see an ad or how to interact with it usually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They look at the photos of the grandchildren, but they don't really sort of, it's not responding to advertising the same way. But they do open their mail. And if we can get to them in their mail, then we can start a conversation with, then moves on to the telephone and then moves face to face. So I've got like a 3-step process and it works incredibly well. And of course, you've got to know what to put in the letter. You've got to write the letter in the right way. You've got to know who to send it to. I think that the way it looks is really important. It mustn't look like junk mail. So all of these different things, but it's a very, very effective process.
I'm a big fan of direct mail. So I got my start in marketing not by doing direct mail, but by studying copywriters that do. And
Okay.
nowadays, no one uses it. So I have a friend, he owns a marketing agency, and one of the main ways he gets clients is by sending them direct mail. And he's an internet marketing agency, digital services, but he calls it the original inbox zero because there's nothing in that physical inbox anymore
Yeah.
outside of just like
And
random junk mail. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
are you like buying a list? Are you doing like individual research where you're sending out each letter manual that's like custom to the business? How does your list segmentation work when it comes to that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Some people say that you sort of personalize each letter to that business owner. And if you're only writing to 10, you can do that. But I've got people in my groups who are on their 15th, 16th acquisition. And the reason they've done so many deals is because they go volume. You can't write to 10 people and buy 16 businesses. So they go to thousands of people on a regular basis, not just once. And that process is creates the best deal flow. And when you've got good deal flow, you become a better negotiator because you don't care so much. Because if you don't want to do my deal, well, I've got these 3 other people that I'm speaking to today. Where if you've only got one person to speak to, then you become a motivated buyer, which is the worst type of buyer because you'll say yes to anything to get the deal. And that's when people reach in their own pocket and start writing the check. Where if you become the person with options, you become a far better deal maker.
I like that. Yeah, you want to become almost unmotivated buyer in that sense. I've said similar things when it comes to your due diligence system. I always tell people there should be multiple layers of checklist, and the entire goal of due diligence is basically to disqualify the business you look at rather than qualify. Because like you get emotionally invested into it otherwise, and you're going to make a lot of probably bad decisions based on that. So I do
Yeah,
like that.
exactly.
What do you say is the you've taught a lot of students at this point. I mean, you yourself have bought a lot of businesses. What are the common mistakes that you see on your end? What do people seem to make or trip over themselves over and over again with?
Yeah, well, first of all, quite often it's confidence. And buying a business is not just about knowing the strategies, knowing the techniques. It's having the confidence to be able to have that conversation with an owner and be able to negotiate a price and terms, and then the confidence to instruct the professionals and get the deal over the line because you need to lead the deal. The deal, it's your acquisition. You need to pull everyone along with you. If you wait for everyone to get back to you and that person says they're going to do that and it doesn't happen, you need to take control and tell other people what to do, including the seller, in order to do the deal. So confidence is really, really important. So what holds people back often is that they can be very confident in other aspects of their lives, but not confident with buying a business. So I've got people who've been, business owners for 10 years, but they never bought a business. So I help people not just with the strategies and the knowledge, but also with that confidence building, because I think that's absolutely critical. Making yourself as confident as possible. And there are some tricks to doing it because, you know, what people worry about is what happens when the owner, the seller, says, have you ever bought a business before? And you're kind of worried that you're going to get asked this question, and you sort of very nervously you say, well, no, I haven't. And then the whole thing starts to fall apart. And I believe that you should always tell the truth, but you can tell the truth in a very positive way. So you can say, no, I've never bought a business before. And then if you've got the speech prepared in your head, you just say the speech, you come out with the speech, and you come out of it better. And the seller goes, all right, I get that. Okay, nice one. And it's good for you. So it's all about that confidence building. And I think, people teach knowledge and skills, and you can learn knowledge and skills, but I think confidence takes longer. So we don't do like a weekend course or anything where, who can become a business buyer in 2 days? I mean, come on, it's unrealistic. We do like a 12-month program because it takes 12 months to really build up that confidence and that self belief.
It's fascinating how much mindset just it peters into everything. My background in the oil field, I had no confidence as a marketer when I was first teaching myself internet marketing. Now I can, like, I've spoken on stage to, I think in aggregate maybe 20,000 people around the world about internet marketing, and like I'm a massive Wikipedia of any digital marketing strategy you want to ask me about at this point because I'm so nerdy about it.
Sure.
But that stuff does take time, and I think a lot of people make the mistake of like, what have I done? Like in the case of a business buyer running a business successfully for 10 years, but no confidence in buying a business. Like, well, why don't you look at your own P&L and like create this folder of awesome? Look at all this cool shit you've done. Probably a lot of business owners would wish they could have done that. Like there's all sorts of stuff you can take from your life that can help increase your confidence. Outside of the confidence factor, is there anything else that you see as like a common mistake when it comes to like the brass tacks of acquiring?
Yeah, going too small, buying businesses that are too small. Mentioned this earlier. I think people should always go bigger. Buying businesses that they can't or looking at businesses they can't finance. So I think very quickly need to decide, is this a business that I can finance? Because if you can't finance it, you can't buy it. And
What
people
kind of
waste time.
businesses would you say are not easily financed or next to impossible to finance?
The businesses that are next to impossible to finance are the businesses where the sellers have unrealistic expectations around value. So they believe their business is worth so much more, and it's just impossible to finance that amount. The best businesses to finance are the businesses where the seller has a realistic expectation of value, or you can talk them down to a realistic expectation of value. So when someone wants millions of dollars for a business that's hardly making any money, you can't finance that. And
Of course.
we have a process where we actually sit down with the owner and we show them how we buy a business. And we say to them, "Do you know how a business is purchased in 2023?" And they go, "No, I don't." I said, "Let me show you." And you show them the numbers because we're very transparent around this. There's no secrecy around how we buy businesses. We show them the numbers and we say, "It's got to work like this. And if it doesn't work like this, we can't buy it. So you want $1 million, you're not going to get $1 million on this basis. The maximum we can do, according to this, is $700. Now, either you accept $700 and we can do a deal, or you hold out for $1 million. It doesn't happen. You come back to us in a year's time. But then you've got a year of frustration owning a business that you want to sell."
I see this so often on the seller side where the expectation is just far too high. They're up in heaven. The buyer's on the ground looking at like, what are you doing over there? Like, why you like come on down? I often tell people it's so much better to take a discount on what you think you're worth because you most likely are
Yes.
overpricing yourself in the seller mindset versus getting absolutely nothing, like 0% of 10 million or
Yeah,
70% of
exactly.
10 million, which is better. Like obviously the 7 million. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've sold sizable businesses, and I see it always from the buyer's perspective because you might think that your business is worth this. You might want it to be worth this. But if the buyer can't finance that level of acquisition, then you have two choices. As you said, you either never sell it and you get nothing, or you sell it for maybe less than you wanted, but you get some money and you get freedom and you get the options to do other things with your life. But not everyone sees it that way, I've got to say. I mean, you can't win them all, which is why you've got to
For
have deals,
sure.
which is why you have lots and lots of choices.
Yeah, 100%. We get that seller stubbornness on our marketplace, and it's tough because like people think that they are the next mini Facebook. Is like, but you're not. Like that's not the way these valuations work usually, right? I know we're short on time, so I want to ask you one final question before we wrap up. What has been the best piece of professional advice you've ever been given or heard that has just really changed the trajectory of your own professional career?
Yeah, so it came from Jim Rohn, and Jim Rohn was the forerunner to Tony Robbins. And Jim Rohn was I only saw him speak live once when I was visiting the US, and he was a phenomenal speaker. And I'm going to paraphrase something that he said. I'll tell you what he said, and I'll tell you my version. He said, "Becoming a millionaire is not about the money that you'll make, it's about the person that you become." And my version of that is buying a business is not about the business that you will own, but the person that you become in the process. You become a far more confident person. You become a better business person. You become a better negotiator. You become a more creative thinker when you buy a business. So the best advice I ever received was that. And I think it's the best advice I give people. Don't just think about the business that you're going to buy, think about the person you're going to become in the process.
I like that. And I am also a huge fan of Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn's one of my favorite
Oh, right.
speakers. Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. I used to have all of his like CDs back when CD-ROMs were still a thing.
Yeah, yeah, me
And when
too.
I was in the oil field, I would be, drilling away, hating it and trying to get out. I would listen to Jim Rohn to like inspire me to keep going. So Jim Rohn is like he's highly underrated. I love that dude. Amazing speaker. I never got to see him live, unfortunately. I always wanted to, but got out of the oil field a little bit too late to go to one of his seminars. But
Right.
yeah,
Brilliant.
great speaker. John, I could probably talk to you for like another hour, but I know you got to run and I got to run. For my audience, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to, shoot you a DM or an email or find out more about your coaching program?
Yeah, go to my YouTube channel. So just put Jonathan J into YouTube. You'll find my YouTube channel. There's about 200 videos on buying a business. And in the description of every single video, there is a link to a free training course. So take the free training course, and that will help you decide whether buying business is right for you. And if it is, there's other stuff that you can do with me if you want to.
Excellent. That's how I found you was through YouTube. I've also listened to your podcast since then. Yeah, excellent YouTube channel, man. I really like the content you're doing. And thank you so much for coming
Thank you
on
so much.
board for the
No,
podcast. It was a
it's
pleasure.
been wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much indeed.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.